Hello and welcome to episode 8 of CPCine, the Amstrad CPC video magazine. We've got a feature-packed episode ahead of us, so let's jump right into the contents list. This month we have all the news from February 1985, a huge grab bag of new releases, some oldies and some newcomers in the February charts. Then we take a look at Mini Office in our software review, before jumping into the wide black unknown of space in Dark Star. After that, we've got our type-in review, which this month comes courtesy of Computing with the Amstrad magazine in the form of Digger. There's more where that came from as well, because we'll also be taking a look at a 3D character generation program in our second type-in review. Then, I've got a nice little feature for you about how I created a free choose-your-own-adventure game that I released alongside episode 7. By this point, you're probably eager to move away from the coding side of things, so let's spice it up again with a look at some modern games. First up is the lovely return of Traxtor. Then it's the turn of the incredible Phantomas 2 remake. And we'll finish off with some final thoughts. That's a lot to get through, so let's get cracking. February is a month for announcements when it comes to the CPC. First up is the news that Timatic Systems will be producing a 5¼ disk drive system for the Amstrad, which will plug in on Drive B of any disk-enabled CPC. This is good news for businesses and home users, as a wide range of CP/M software has only been available on 5¼ systems in the past. According to an interview with Computing with the Amstrad magazine, Timatic have had working 5¼ disk drives running on a CPC 464 for some time now, and they've only been waiting for Amstrad to properly roll out their DDI1 system before launching their own drives. It's nice to see third-party companies who are willing to fit with the standard interfaces rather than trying to introduce their own incompatible ones like they did on the Spectrum. The new drives will be bundled with a disk full of utilities, which should get new users up and running very quickly. Next up, we have an interesting announcement from Touchmaster, also courtesy of Computing with the Amstrad. They are planning to do a rollout of a graphics tablet for the CPC. According to their press release, the new tablet will be available soon, so it'll be interesting to see how it fares in future episodes. Firebird have bought the rights to publish Acorn Soft's absolute classic game Elite for publication on the CPC. The conversion from the BBC original is being helmed by Ian Bell and David Braben, the original coders of the game. Publication is expected around May this year, and you can guarantee that we will be looking at this one on the show when it arrives. The DK-Tronics speech synthesizer is now on shelves, battling against Amstrad's own SSA1 system. Which is better? Probably the DK-Tronics on the whole, because of its slightly better sound, but to be fair, both are pretty limited. They're very much a novelty, which is why so few games and other applications actually supported them. The CPC 464 has now dug in properly in Spain, with Indescomp and their 1,000 retailer distribution network thoroughly setting the Amstrad system onto the path for dominance. At the same time in Australia, Awa Thorn are already receiving requests for information from eager users, despite the fact that they haven't even rolled out their advertising campaign for the system yet. The Amstrad CPC is bedding in very nicely all across the world and looks to be a major player for the rest of the 80s. Well done, Arnold. But here's the most interesting development of all. With the CPC 464 rolling out across the globe, Amstrad have announced that Old Arnold has a sister. At the International Trade Show for Home Computers, Software and Leisure Electronics, or LET for short, on the 17th of February 1985, Alan Sugar unveiled the Amstrad CPC 664 to the world. The press made a big thing about the fact that this 664 could run all of the 464's software, and also loved its built-in 3-inch disk drive. We'll have a thorough look at this new CPC in episode 11 when the 664 is actually released to the public. But for now, I want to focus on a couple of statements from the 7th of February issue of Popular Computing Weekly. According to PCW, the 664's monitor will contain a more sophisticated video chip, and they also claim that the 664 will likely feature 128K of memory in 2 switchable banks of 64K. Does that sound familiar to anyone? So, why is PCW making these odd claims? Well, it's because Alan Sugar has already hinted at the existence of a third CPC. one that we aren't supposed to know about yet, but which, clearly, Popular Computing Weekly have had some information about. Who wants to hazard a guess at which system that one is? Answers in the comments section. Amstrad have also announced a separate machine, one that very little is known about at this point. Apparently it's a hybrid 16 and 32-bit system, contains a 68,000 based chipset, and is, according to Popular Computing, likely to be previewed at the Personal Computer World show in September. It'll feature the GEM operating system, and it's designed to compete directly against the Atari ST. More information on what this machine is as and when we get it, or if we get it. But for now, let's move back to the CPC 464. Apparently the CPC can't print long strings properly, according to John Hayes of Torquay. Apparently any long strings that are printed in succession using the print command accompanied by a semicolon will instead print on separate lines. Mr. Hayes suggests using print A string plus B string to solve the problem, instead of putting two print commands together with a semicolon separating them. The Amstrad CPC is now available for sale in select branches of WH Smith's, which increases the high street presence of the system. Expect to see the machine feature in Smith's own computer shop section soon. Personal Computer News has placed the Amstrad CPC 464 at their number 4 choice in top computer hardware for their 100th issue. The CPC ranks behind the BBC, but above Yamaha's CX-5M computer, which is pretty good going for the big black machine of destiny. The top two spots are of course taken by the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64 because the other systems just can't catch a break. Finally, we can definitely confirm at this point that Amsoft's 12-pack is definitely being bundled with new CPCs. The advert showing the 12-pack is in the February issue of Your Computer magazine, which tells us the 12-pack is now out there in the wild. Still, it's weird to see that Dixon's is one of the retailers carrying the 12-pack bundle in this February advert, because even in May of 1985, they still weren't bundling the CPC with the 12-pack in every case, as the CPC my parents bought came with a very different set of games. Perhaps Dixon's had multiple options for what came with the computer? Who knows? If you know, leave a comment in the comments section below, because I really need to know what the answer is here and my parents just don't remember. And that's all the news we have for February 1985. We have a load of new releases this month, and with the aim of keeping things moving along smoothly, I've decided to link together the new releases with the missing software section. So from now on, we'll just keep the two running together, and any software that isn't available online will be noted as we go along. So let's get into it. Sorcery arrives courtesy of Virgin. While it will quickly be superseded by an enhanced edition called Sorcery Plus, it's still a very fun game and you really should give it a try. Database Publications, who also publish Computing with the Amstrad magazine, have released The Magic Sword, a text-adventure game aimed at younger children. It seems pretty good too. Ray Davies presents text-adventure Castle Dracula from Duckworth. Well, it's Duckworth in the adverts, but the cassettes themselves call the company Ducksoft. So what is it with the 80s and people changing names all the time? It's really confusing. Jay Forbett of Sussex has released 6 simple games and music programs, including Synth 3, which he's retailing at £2.50. That's not a bad price for 6 programs, I think you'll agree. Sadly, the software does not appear to be available online, or if it is, I just can't track it down. And that's one of the problems with only naming one of the titles in the advert. G&L Software have released a Supercharger Fast Loader utility that can apparently load in software at 4000 baud, which is double the faster rate that the CPC can natively handle. They're charging £5.50 for it, so I hope it's as good as they claim. Sadly, I can't find it online to check. Viking Software are producing a 3-in-1 games package, selling Viking Dig, Shootout and Pontoon Deluxe in one package. They've also added Simple Maths to their list of programs, but none of these appear to be available online, which is a real shame. I don't know how we missed it, but Software Projects have released Carl's Treasure Hunt sometime in 1984, and the only time that I've seen it mentioned is in a small press advert where someone was trying to sell it second hand, along with a few other games that we've already covered. Sorry Carl, at least we noticed you now, eh? I don't recall us covering as much educational software of late, but Osprey, a game about successful resource management to protect rare birds, has arrived courtesy of Born Educational Software. So, kids who are only allowed a home computer because it could teach them something can rejoice. Well, kind of. Then it's time to learn some geography with Born Educational Software's Worldwise, an educational title that looks very much similar to all of their other titles because let's face it, they had a format and they stuck to it. Alligator brings us a lovely Defender clone in Defend or Die. EI Systems brings us Tipster, a horse racing prediction program. It's not available online, so that's all we can say about it. We mentioned in episode 7 that we weren't sure when the Quill was released for the CPC, but I can happily say that it is now being advertised for sale on the Amstrad, so it was definitely here by the middle of February 1985. That's alright then. Smuggler's Cove arrives on the CPC via Camel Software. This is a text adventure that's ported from the ZX Spectrum, where it received a cult following. Soft Options brings us 2 programs for the computer graphics enthusiast, both of which appear to be unavailable online. The first is The Artist, an art program, and the second is Big Letters. Neither of them are available online, sadly. Select Software brings us Pool's prediction program Pool's Winner, which is a useful utility if you're into that sort of thing. Siren Software brings us Tape Utility, a program for backing up cassettes, whether they're protected or not, according to the advert anyway. It is available online, but in a broken form, since the backup won't actually run, because hey, irony just knows no bounds. Nemesis brings us text adventure Angelique, a grief encounter. The layout and style is very similar to their classic Arnold Blackwood series, which is pretty cool. PSS provides Battle for Midway, a rather in-depth strategic wargame. If you can't wait to get your hands on Elite, perhaps Spaceflight Simulator Interdictor Pilot from Supersoft will keep you going. At £17.95 on its first release, it had better. The Hobbit has arrived, courtesy of Melbourne House. Do I need to explain this one further? It's an absolute classic text adventure that's still loved by many adventure gamers today. Level 9 brings us yet another text adventure, this time covering the trials of an ancient civilization hidden deep in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle, in Emerald Isle. The amazing Dark Star from Design has arrived, and it is awesome. I played this game so much as a kid, even though I didn't actually know what I was doing in it, and we'll have a proper look at it later in this episode. Freecrest are advertising Trashman in Popular Computing Weekly, but I cannot find any game of that name available until 1986. And the screenshots from the 1986 game do confirm that it is indeed from 1986. So, was this game severely delayed, or is there a second Trashman game, this one from 1985, that we just don't know about? Let me know in the comments section if you know what this is. Universal Software brings us Amstrad Turbo 4000, a turbo loading program that is, once again, sadly not available online. As with the previous turbo loader we discussed, it can load it up to 4000 board, hence the name, and it costs £5. Chopper Squad comes to us courtesy of Interceptor. It looks more than a little like a cross between Joust and Jetpack, doesn't it? Nice. Maze Game Spook Loot arrives via Andtronic. Sadly, it is another missing title, which is a shame, and the only image I could find from it was a small monochrome picture via the CPC Rules website, so at some point it has actually existed. And it is a real shame that we can't see it, because Popular Computing Weekly called it a simplified version of Attic Attack, and I'd really like to see what that is. Educational title Decision Maker from Amsoft arrives. It's a large package too, both sides of a disc are being used for this, which probably helps to justify its £24.95 asking price in 1985 money. Amsoft are now distributing Campbell Software's Masterfile database, which will later become known as Masterfile 464 when its 128K successor arrives. Project Planner rounds out Amsoft's line of expensive business and educational titles for this month, and once again, it takes up 2 sides of the floppy disk, so it's a rather substantial title. Then we have Flight Simulation from Merdin Software. It's a pretty beefy flight simulator that would later be re-released by Alternative Software as just Flight Simulator. So if you recognise it, but thought it came out later on, that's why. Frankenstein, that classic puzzle platformer for the ZX Spectrum, arrives on the CPC in fine form, with different levels to the original and more colour. It's great. Dragon's Lair gets ported from the gorgeous arcade version to a somewhat less gorgeous CPC version, courtesy of Software Projects, although Personal Computer News thought it was from Amsoft. Curse of the Seven Faces is a text adventure game from Arctic Computing that was released sometime around February of 1985, but which is not available online, although copies of the ZX Spectrum version are not too hard to find. Personal Computer News seemed to think it was decent, so it's a real shame that there aren't any copies available online. Tape copying program AMSKey arrives courtesy of Interlock Services. Real-Time Games brings us the lovely looking 3D Star Strike. Once again, this is a port of a ZX Spectrum game, but it looks very nice nevertheless. Amstrad mascot Roland is back once again. This time he's come here to confuse people in Roland Goes Square Bashing. Black Knight Software brings us the fast-paced arcade game Time Bomb. Black Knight have also released Spectrabug, an arcade game in which you have to escape from a ZX Spectrum, but sadly that one doesn't appear to be available online. Timatic has released versions of Microsoft Basic and BBC Basic for the Amstrad CPC under CPM. Anyone who wants to be able to code for their school's information technology homework on their Amstrad CPC would have loved both these editions, I'm sure. That weird creature the Pie Man arrived on the CPC courtesy of Automata in their weird arcade game Morris Meets the Bikers. ProSol is trying to sell a program to unlock protected software for £9.95. Good luck with that, ProSol. No copies are available online. Yes, another software copying tool, AmsCopy, has been released, this time by Ultratech and costing £4.95. And with so many of these programs around, it's no wonder there was so much talk about schoolyard piracy. And that rounds up this software for February 1985. However, we do have some more titles on the book front, where we have an Amstrad CPC 464 compendium by Martin Gandalf and Robert Kinga. Popular Computing Weekly weren't too keen on this one, probably because it does what a lot of computer books did, and that was mainly list loads of type-ins, complete with spelling errors. And last but not least, if you fancy a replica firearm to go with your microcomputer, well, Razzmatazz have you covered. Because, you know, computer hobbyists and replica guns go so well together, don't they? Good grief. Thanks to Jenny Kirk for pointing this one out. And that's all we have for February 1985. This month's charts come from the 28th of February issue of Popular Computing Weekly, because that makes them the final charts for the month, and that, in my head, makes them the most accurate. So let's see how the CPC's listings were holding up this month. At number 10 we have The Mighty Classic Adventure from Amsoft. Ocean's Hunchback drops to number 9 this month. Dark Star flies straight into the charts at number 8. The Forest at World's End is still managing to cling in there at number 7. Another adventure game sits at number 6, it's Jewels of Babylon. Next up we have Grand Prix Driver from Amsoft at number 5. Micropower's Ghouls returns to the charts at number 4. Steve Davis Snooker drops from the top spot, landing at number 3. Manic Miner takes the silver, coming in at number 2. While Football Manager plants itself firmly at the top of the league, leaping to number 1 this month. It's very interesting to see how the charts keep changing so much in the early days of the CPC. I wonder how things will fare in the future months, now that third-party developers are starting to take root firmly into the community. Even back in the formative years of home computers, there was a need for all-in-one business packages of the kind that you would see today. Mini-Office was one of the more popular and consequently more famous packages around. It arrived on the CPC in early 1985 on disc and cassette. Although it would be quickly overshadowed by its own sequel, which arrived only a year later, the original Mini-Office offers all the programs a serious home user, home office worker, or small business would need. It comes complete with a word processor, a database program, a spreadsheet program, and a graphics tool. Today we're going to take a look at each of the packages in Mini-Office to see how well they stood up against modern equivalents, and generally to get a feel for how the program fared as a whole. We'll start with the word processor, since that's the package that a lot of us home users would likely be the most familiar with. Word processing is a commonplace thing now, Pretty much every computer either comes with a package pre-installed, or one is accessible online via something like Google Docs or iCloud. Back in the 80s, things were a little different. Back then, you had to buy your word processor separately, or make do with one that you typed in from a magazine. In many cases, the commercial and basic type-in packages weren't all that different from one another, and we got along just fine. MiniOffice's word processor is decent enough. It has a nice layout with bright colours, and it runs reasonably smoothly, although I have to mention that there is lag when you type in as fast as I do. Back in the 80s, I wouldn't have noticed much of a lag because I couldn't touch type or type at any real speed, but now, after decades of practice, I can see a definite lag between what I type and what I see on the screen. The program lags anywhere between 2 and 4 words behind what I'm doing, which runs the very serious risk of me filling the keyboard buffer before the CPC can send all of its information to the system memory. That's not a good thing with a word processor. You risk losing data that way. This tells me that anyone who was a decent typist back in the 80s would have found the word processor too slow to use on a day-to-day basis, which is not great news. For everyone else, especially the occasional letter writer and a newcomer novelist for example, the program would probably work just fine. That said, there is one big problem with the word processor in MiniOffice, and this really should have been remedied before the program was even made available. If you attempt to print from the MiniOffice word processor, but you have no printer attached, the computer will crash. Lovely. Well done, guys. Hopefully this will be remedied by the time MiniOffice 2 arrives, but we'll have to wait until our episodes covering 1986 to find out. At least they put a warning on page 8 of the manual, I suppose. The database program has a major flaw in it as well. Selecting the first option on the menu will instantly crash the program if you haven't already created some files. This isn't looking good for the package as a whole, is it? No wonder MiniOffice 2 became the standard program and this one pretty much disappeared. Despite this obvious, and surely very easy to correct before release, problem, the database software works really well. The creation of databases is simple, adding entries is as easy as can be, and sorting the entries, displaying individual entries and so forth is all incredibly easy. This is absolutely a strong point in this package. I couldn't be happier with the database. It would still work very nicely if you were using it today, albeit for small databases, because let's face it, the CPC's memory is, of course, limited. So far, MiniOffice isn't shaping up too bad. The word processor's okay, although there are far better word processors already out there, and the database, that's great. So how do the other parts of this package hold up? Well, the spreadsheet program also has a problem, and it's similar to the problem in the word processor. It's just too damn slow. I found myself constantly overshooting the cell that I wanted to edit because the computer just can't keep up with me when I'm working. This is probably something that you could get used to, and no doubt users of the software back in the 80s did just that. But my goodness, it's annoying. Despite that, the spreadsheet is definitely usable, and it's quite impressive. All the features that you would associate with a spreadsheet are here, and they work just as you would expect. You can create labels for the rows and columns, you can create formulae, and they will adjust really quickly. The program may not move fast during navigation, but it's lightning fast when it comes to actually doing the calculations that you would want a spreadsheet for. I'm really impressed with it. Each function is tied to a command key on the keyboard, so you can give the spreadsheet a title with the T button, input formulae with the F button, return to the home cell by pressing the H button, and so forth. It's all very simple and very straightforward. If it wasn't for the speed of navigation with the cursor keys, and the fact that the software bleeps after every single thing you do, which is a stupid idea for an Office program, then I would have no problem recommending this even today. It has the same issues with memory overheads that the database does, but even now, if you're only making a small spreadsheet for home use, you could still get by using MiniOffice. Finally, we have the graphics program. This is not an art package. In fact, it's not any other kind of graphics program that you may be thinking of. This is for displaying charts based on files that you've created in the spreadsheet program. As a result, you have to have created a spreadsheet file and saved it to disk or tape before you even load this software. Once you've done that, you can make various charts based on those spreadsheets. It's useful if you need to see your data in graph form, but for everyone else, it's one you can miss. Overall, Mini Office isn't a bad package, but I have to admit there are better versions of everything that it does already available on the CPC in one form or another. It's always the case that dedicated software is likely to do the tasks available in Mini Office packages far better than this all-in-one solution ever could, because dedicated teams worked on those packages to make them the best they could be. But if all you're looking for is something that would get a home office up and running for you right away and out of one box, you can't go wrong giving this a try. Larger businesses will need to look elsewhere, however, as the package can be quite slow and clunky at times. Some games aren't really games in the traditional sense. They're more akin to experiences. You don't play them, you feel them, you hear them, and yes, you do experience them. Traxtor is one of those games. For those of us who played Codename Matt and absolutely needed more in that vein, Traxtor seems the ideal choice. You're in a similar situation. You're flying in space, shooting enemies, but now there's even more to the game than before, because now you get to fly down onto planets and attack enemies there too. The purpose of the game is to liberate as many planets as you can, which you do by flying down onto them and attacking everything that moves, as well as everything that doesn't, if the in-game instructions are to be believed. Then, when you're done, you fly off into space again to start the whole process over on another world. Traxtor is a game that I adored playing as a child because it was different to everything else that I had played back then, and it was a lot of fun to get stuck into. It had its own unique look to it, which stands out even to this day, and it has a brilliant sense of scale. There's something about the way that you absolutely can just fly around for hours on a planet's surface without coming into contact with anything at all. And I have to admit that I ended up doing that a bit while getting the footage for this review, because I initially forgot that you can bring up a map by pressing escape, so I didn't actually know where I was supposed to be going. The same can happen in space if you wanted to, and sometimes as a kid I would just fly around in space for ages, seeing whether there was anything interesting hiding out in the depths that my friends and I hadn't even seen before. There never was, but the feeling of it being possible to discover something never went away. When played properly, like I wasn't doing back then, Traxtor is a fast-paced, action-packed and immensely good fun game. The vector graphics give it a wonderful feel that stands apart from its counterparts, and the sound effects are right on point for the atmosphere that it is very definitely aiming to produce. Everything looks weird, moves weird, and sounds weird. This game is definitely doing its best to be alien and unnatural, which it succeeds at perfectly. It's so much fun, and if you're into your space shooting and space simulator games, you'll probably get a kick out of this one. Digger is a bright, well-designed single-screen arcade game that uses the CPC's Mode 0 to great effect. It has decent controls, a lot of machine code for a basic type-in, and even a soundtrack, which is pretty cool. It shows off to great effect what Computing with the Amstrad magazine was putting out to compete with the likes of Amstrad Computer Users' monthly star type-in game. Unfortunately, it also shows off why there were many problems with Computing with the Amstrad. If you type in the game as it is written in the magazine, it won't work, plain and simple. You'll be met with a memory error warning and the game will just not run. How do you get around this? Very easily, it turns out. Just delete line 30. The line isn't needed and it will just crash the game. This should have been spotted well before the listing went to print, but it wasn't, and that was a big problem with Computing with the Amstrad. Bugs aside, the game is densely coded, so you have to keep your wits about you when typing it in. It's worth it though, because the game is a lot of good fun. It starts off pretty easy, the monsters will move randomly, and it's really easy to keep clear of them. Watch out on later levels however, because they will home in on you like crazy, which makes the game very fast paced and quite a challenge. Gameplay is simple too. You need to collect 8 crystals from the bottom of the screen and deliver them to your ship. The crystals must be heavy however, because you can only carry one of them at a time, so you'll need to keep moving. Dig through the dirt and grab the crystal, then hurry back to your ship and repeat the process. Do it as fast as you can, because there's a bonus score that's ticking down. It's a classic arcade style game at heart, so the highest score wins. As games go, that really is all there is to it, and it's pretty simple. but that's not a bad thing. So let's take a look at the code itself. As I said earlier, this is pretty densely packed, and it's using a lot of techniques that we've discussed in earlier episodes, especially the colour changing and line changing trick from episode 7. That's how sprites are being displayed in multiple colours and over several text lines all at once. It's a clever trick, and it's nice to see it being used so well in a game. The code for Digger shows us several features that would become common amongst the more high-performing type-ins that we've come to know and love or hate in later issues of the CPC magazines from various publishers. First and foremost, Digger contains machine code that is read into the CPC via data commands. These codes allow the game to run far smoother than a basic game otherwise could, because they're, of course, not having to be interpreted by the basic each time they're run. And there's also another use of the data command in Digger. Several portions of the code deal with enemy placement, level layout, and so forth. Naturally, this information will change during the course of the game because you pick up crystals, cut through the level to reach the crystals, and most importantly, the enemies move to pursue you. That means the information that was brought into memory from these data statements would be correct only during your first playthrough on the game, and if anything is changed, subsequent plays would see you trying to complete a level that has already been done entirely, or at least partially. So, what are you to do with that? How do you get the original data back? The simple solution to the problem is the restore command, which we see in use on line 1030. The restore command effectively resets the data that you're going to be using, setting it back to its original state. That means you can reuse it as many times as you want, as if you had never altered it in the first place. It's a really useful command. All in all, Digger is a relatively short type-in, but the game itself is fun for a few minutes of hectic gameplay. It's certainly a nicer looking game than several others that we've tried in the past, and although the type-in was a little dense to go through, it is ultimately worth it. Just don't try typing it in from the magazine yourself, unless you're willing to debug it line by line as well. Instead, get the working version of the tape image at cpcpower.com, link in the description box. If you've ever fancied creating 3D characters on your CPC, this very short routine from the 23rd of February issue of Personal Computer News will set you up just fine. This program is only 16 lines long and can easily be incorporated into your own programs, so let's give it a look. Basically what's going on here is a simple move and print routine. The code takes the text $string as defined on line 60 and prints it twice to give the appearance of a shadow. It's a trick that you will no doubt have seen time and time again in various games and basic typing programs, and there's a reason for that. It works well. The listing in PCN prints both lines of text in the same colour, which, let's face it isn't great for legibility, but which does go some way to making the text appear 3D. Personally, I would have adjusted the colour to print the text in two different colours, such as a light colour for the upper text and then a darker one for the lower text. This then presents the upper text as if it's floating, with the lower text as its shadow. Either way, it's a nice bit of code that can be put to good use in other programs should you wish to give it a try. Last episode I mentioned that I had written a short choose-your-own-adventure style game in BASIC, and that I'd made the game available via the CPC wiki. It's still there if you fancy giving it a try, but this month I want to talk to you about how I made it, because I put the code together in a way that allows anyone who fancies it to give creating their own game a try. The code is split into segments, as is common with a basic game. Each segment has a specific task, and the most important of those segments is, of course, the game loop. We'll take a look at that in a moment, but first let's take a look at what the segments of the game code are. As is standard in BASIC, the first few lines are all just copyright information, so we can skip this. Line 41 is interesting, however, as it's a boolean marker. I added this line later in the coding, which is why it's on line 41 rather than using the usual 10, 20, 30, etc. line numbering. This boolean, done %, is used by the game to determine whether it needs to read all the data lines from the end of the code into memory or not. In many games, it doesn't matter whether the code keeps rereading the data into memory, but in the case of a game like this, it's essential to the flow of the game that we only read the data once. That's because there's just so much of it that when the game first starts, the user can't do anything for a couple of seconds while the data is being processed. I therefore chose to add a check on whether we've already done the data loading or not to the start of the game setup, so that we can bypass it if it's already done. The game doesn't change the data as the player is going through it, so we can do this. In something like Digger, which we looked at earlier, where the data changes, you can't, you have to reset it. But here in this game where we've got nothing changing, it's perfectly fine. Lines 45 to 90 all set the pen and paper colours, then print the title screen. We've seen all of this done before. Once that's done, lines 110 to 190 process the data, providing it hasn't been done before already, and wait for the player to press a key to begin the game. There are two ways that you can do this in BASIC. You could use an if-then loop, such as a string equals in-key string. If a string equals blank, go to whatever line this is, else go to whatever line you want. That's a fairly standard way of doing things, but you can also do it the way I did it, and simply use call &bb18 and then go to whatever line you want. This does the same thing as that long line of code, but it's shorter. Calling &bb18 is a CPC firmware instruction that tells the CPC to wait for a key press before it does anything else. Then line 200 to 280 is the main game loop, which we'll cover in a moment because it's where the magic happens, as they say. After line 280 we have quite a gap in the line numbers because, to be honest with you, I expected to have to put a lot more code into here for the game loop. That means if you fancy expanding on this game with more commands or whatever, there's plenty of room to do so. So next we have lines 700 to 750 because, like I said, we had quite a gap. These lines print the victory message for the game. I used a nifty coding trick here which allows for multiple victory situations with different messages for each situation, but in the end I only coded in one way to win the game. That means that you can use this game code to create your own games with multiple endings, and you won't need to alter this section of the code to do it. How I achieved this will become more clear once we've had a look at how the data lines are structured, so I'll leave it for now and we can come back to it later. As you can see from line 740, I chose to use the if a string equals blank go to loop for waiting for the player to press a key for this routine to demonstrate that this works just the same as an &bb18 call. Lines 800 to 840 print the game over message. I could have used a similar trick to the victory message code to have each game over trigger a different message, but I decided not to for the game over. If you want to go for that for your own games, you can modify this section of the code to work similarly to the victory code. That's not a problem at all. Then we have lines 900 to 960, which handle quitting the game. This was added mainly so that I could test sections of the game properly, but I left it in because sometimes a player might decide that they had made the wrong choice and they just want to go back to the start. Basically, it's a set of checks for which key the player has pressed, and it's fairly straightforward. It does include one important line of code, however, the use of the upper string command, which turns a given string into all uppercase. It has a corresponding command for turning strings into all lowercase called lower string. It's essential that any check of what a user inputs is run through either upper string or lower string, as this gets rid of any problems that you might have involving a user who has caps lock turned on or who chooses or doesn't choose to use the shift key to capitalize the first letter that they type. Here I've put upper string on line 930 in the form of a string equals upper string a string, but I could have merged this line in with line 920 to save memory. If I had done this, line 920 would read a string equals upper string in key string. If a string equals blank, go to 920. I split the two lines so that I could highlight how upper string works in BASIC, but you might like to save some memory by putting those two lines together in your own game. Finally, we have the game data and the code for processing it. This takes up the bulk of the listing, as you would expect. The data begins on line 1040 and continues down to line 1420. Before it is a short piece of code that tells the CPC how to handle the data. I've split that code into 3 lines so that we can read it clearer, but again, if you wanted to save memory, you could fit it all into one line of code. Line 1010 begins a for next loop running from 1 to 38. That's the number of scenarios in the game. In a choose-your-own-adventure style book, each of these scenarios would be a paragraph that you need to turn to during the adventure, beginning with the first paragraph in the book and then moving on. If you create a game with more scenarios than 38, or fewer in fact, then you will need to change the 38 in this loop to the total number of scenarios in your game, otherwise the code won't work properly and you would either miss out part of your game or get an error because you've run out of data statements. This for next loop looks complex at first, but here's what it's actually doing. First, it loads a string into an array called parastring. Parastring, like the other arrays that we'll discuss in a moment, was created during the setup and data processing segments on lines 110 to 190. Parastring is the array that displays the scenario text, the paragraph of text that you would read in a choose-your-own-adventure game. Each string in the parastring array is a separate paragraph setting out each scenario in the game. Next, there's another for next loop. This reads data into two more arrays, opt-mess-string, which contains all of the text about each option that the player can choose, and opt-percentage, which is a series of numbers. I've added dollar and percent to the end of these because those are indicators that tell the CPC what kind of data each array can hold. Dollar means the variable or array can hold any combination of characters in any order. It's a string, be it letters, numbers, punctuation or whatever. Percentage means the variable or array can only hold whole numbers. There is a third indicator for defining real numbers, but we don't need to really look at that for this game, so I haven't included one. What is interesting is that I could have called both of these arrays essentially the same thing, because it's possible to have two arrays with the same name but different indicators. That means that when we used a string with the InKey string command earlier on, we could have already had an a percentage variable if we'd wanted one. I thought that it might get a bit confusing, so I've called all of the arrays different things, but if you wanted to, you could have called both of them the same thing, just with dollar and percent on the end of them. Some of you might be wondering what the difference is between a variable and an array at this point, so let's clear that up. A variable is something that can be changed, literally something that is variable. If I set a string, for example, to hold the word hello for our program, we could then alter it to hold the word goodbye later on in the program. That's how variable it is. Similarly, in a for next loop, we will use something like t% as a variable and have the computer count up or down a series of numbers during the loop, but the number in question is always being held in the same variable, t%. An array is slightly different. Arrays hold a set of variables. In our case, the parastring array holds all of the paragraphs of text in the game, with each paragraph being a separate string, but all of the strings are in the same array. You can think of arrays like a numbered list, where each item on the list is a different variable. You can change the content of each variable, but its position in the list will not change. That's good to know if you want to create a high score table, for example. Anyway, let's get back to the game code. The opt-mess dollar and opt% arrays are 4 times the size of the parastring array, because for each paragraph of text, I've included space for 4 options that the player can choose from. The game I created only actually uses 2 of those 4 options because I wanted to keep the game simple, but I also wanted the space for you to create more complex games if you chose to do so. The opt-mess string array contains the text that accompanies each choice, or option. In a choose-your-own-adventure style book, this would be something like, if you choose to take the axe, or if you choose to fight the dragon, and so forth. The opt% array contains the scenario the game needs to jump to when an option is selected. This is how the game knows which paragraph of text to display and which options to offer the player next. So that's how the data is laid out. Once all the data has been read into memory using our 2 for next loops, there's a return command on line 3000. That means there is a significant gap in the line numbers between the end of the data code and the command to jump back to the game proper. So you can add more scenarios when coding your own game. If you run out of space and have to overwrite line 3000, just remember that you have to add another line with a return command on it, otherwise the game won't work. Now that we've gone through the whole listing, let's jump back to the game loop. This is where the player will spend most of their time, as you would expect. I've laid this out simply and as efficiently as possible because I wanted to make the game as simple for other people to use for their own games as I could. Before each scenario is presented to the player, I tell the CPC to clear the screen using the CLS command. You are of course welcome to choose not to do this, so that all of the previous information stays on the screen, and all you need to do for that is to remove the CLS command from line 210. But for this, I just like to present each scenario fresh to the top of the screen. The computer then prints data from the parastring array, which we discussed earlier. The particular string from the array to print is determined by the room% variable. During the game's setup code on lines 110 to 190, we initially set room% to 1, which means that the first paragraph in the parastring array will be the first scenario the player reads when the game starts. The game then runs a for next loop to present the 4 options available for each scenario, or it would if there were 4 options. Remember that I said I'd created this game to allow for more complex games, but then I'd only created a game with 2 options per scenario? Well, here's how the game caters for that lack of extra options. In the loop, the first thing that the game does is check which scenario each option will take the player to. If the destination scenario is set to 0, the game will not present that option to the player. If it's not set to 0, the game will print whatever is in the opt-mess $array for that particular option on the current scenario. Then we have another example of the A string equals in key string code that we've seen earlier, only this time we're doing more with it than simply waiting for the player to pick any key that they fancy. The game is looking for one of 5 inputs, the numbers 1 to 4 and the Q key. If it doesn't receive any of those inputs, it will print an error message and jump back to asking for an input. Pressing Q triggers the quit game subroutine that we've already looked at. Pressing 1 to 4 will trigger some extra code. First of all, the computer will determine whether that is a valid choice for the current scenario, because I've made it possible for each scenario to have anything from 1 to 4 options on it. This allows extra customizability in your own games. If the destination scenario for the current option is 0, the game will print the same invalid key press error that the player would receive if they had pressed an incorrect key, and then the game will wait for another key to be pressed. If the player presses a key for a valid option, the game will change the room% variable to match whatever the destination scenario is by making room% equal to whatever is in the opt% array for that particular choice, and then it will restart the game loop. Thus, the player is presented with a new scenario and we start the whole thing for the key press all over again. As I said earlier, this is a very simple game loop. It's as simple as I could have made it while retaining the customizability that I was looking for, and I think you'll agree that it's a relatively easy one to follow once it's explained. But how does the game know when you've won or lost? That's also as simple as I could have made it. On lines 215 and 216, we have a couple of if commands, which check what the destination scenario is for the first option of the current scenario. These checks occur immediately before the player is prompted to choose an option. On line 215, we check to see whether the destination scenario is 0. If it is, we jump to the Game Over message segment. Line 216 checks to see if the destination scenario is 9999. If it is, we jump to the Victory message segment. If you're writing a game that has more than 9,999 scenarios, then you'll want to change this check to something else. I would recommend checking for -1, as that would prevent any accidental you win errors in the future. Maybe I should have put that in when I was creating the game, but I didn't. Sorry. As I mentioned before, jumping to the Victory segment prints an extra message for the player. I did this because I wanted to give the option of having multiple victory messages. The player has already been presented with the parastring text by the time that we have checked for a possible victory, so they have a paragraph of text on screen already. By jumping to the victory code at this point, it allows us to use the opt-mess $array to display a second paragraph. And you could, if you wished, alter this code to display all 4 option messages if you wanted. That means we could get a whole screen of text out if you felt like it. Either way, the code prints whatever you have entered as the message for the first option, then asks the player to press a key to continue. And that's it. That is the game. I made the code as simple as possible to make it as easy as I could to create a choose-your-own-adventure style game. I would be very happy to see what you all end up doing with this code, and if you do decide to make your own game, be sure to let me know so that I can give it a try. Happy coding! Match 3 games have been really popular amongst puzzle game fans and casual gamers alike for years now. Ever since Bejeweled perfected the genre, there have been outpourings of Match 3 titles on just about every system going, and the Amstrad CPC is no exception. The games are bright, colourful, easy to get to grips with, and highly rewarding to play. It's the perfect gaming combination. The return of Traxtor is a Match 3 title with a twist. Instead of highlighting colours that are already on screen and moving them around one at a time, you play as a small ship at the bottom of the screen with column upon column of gems to move around to produce arrays of 3 or more matching colours. The columns are advancing towards you, and if one reaches you, the game is over, so it's essential to keep matching colours if you want the game to continue. The colours are bright and appealing. The gameplay is simple at first, but gets fiendish as the game goes on. It controls very nicely. There are only 4 buttons: left, right, pick up a block, and place a block. It's very simple, and that's why it works so well. I really like this game. It's a lot of fun. Kind of a combination between Columns and Buster Move, only with its own unique twist. I got a Clax vibe from it, but that may just be because of the colours and the fact that I've mostly played Clax on the CPC over the years. But either way, it is a fantastic game. The soundtrack is also really catchy. It's a simple tune that hides a little complexity, just like the gameplay. While I can see how it might annoy some people after a while, you aren't losing anything by turning the sound down, so don't worry about it. You can also turn the music off in the game's options menu, or switch to a different track entirely. There are 4 to choose from, which is pretty cool, and my advice is to find one that you like and go with it. All in all, this is a brilliant game that puzzle fans and people looking for a quick and simple game to pass some time with will adore. I know I do. Well done, Juan Martinez, you've put together something brilliant here. Back in 1986, Codemasters released an English-language port of the Spanish game Phantomas 2, coded by Emilio Salguero for Dynamic Software. Called Vampire in English, the game is a platform puzzle game featuring 95 rooms, many of them potentially deadly to a player that is not paying attention. Your goal is to unlock 5 doors by retrieving 5 keys, open 6 shutters, find a hammer, a stake and a cross, and then defeat Count Dracula. Hence in English it was called Vampire. Sounds fairly straightforward for a game of this kind, yes? Well, prepare to battle against deadly foes who will thwart you at every turn. Navigate really poorly laid out screens sometimes, some of which will see you stuck in areas where you simply can't get out without dying or quitting the game, and atrocious controls. The game features 2 jump buttons, a long jump, which is the one that you use for the most, and a short jump, which is only useful when navigating tight spots. It's like trying to play Ghosts and Goblins and Roland in the Caves at the same time. On top of all this, the game is a blatant specky port, right down to the beeper-style sound effects. All in all, it is a typical budget game for the time. I'm not going to say it's awful because it's not. It's a moderately enjoyable game to play once you get the hang of it, but it could have been a whole lot better. So let's skip forward. Let's come to 2019 and see what the CPC community managed when they took another look at Vampire, aka Phantomas 2. First of all, it looks amazing. This is a proper CPC game now. It has brilliant graphics and a whole lot more charm. This is the kind of game that we should have been getting all along. It's great. There's also a soundtrack, and it's brilliant. The tune will easily get stuck in your head, and I don't mind that at all because it's fun. The sound effects are better, and the music is lovely. I cannot fault this on any level. The controls are far better now too. There's only 1 jump button instead of 2, and how far or how high you jump is determined by how long you hold down the button. It's very intuitive. The original game had an annoying feature whereby you would continue moving in the direction that you were facing when you jumped, which was really annoying because it meant that you would very easily get yourself stuck in a deadly situation, ending your game early. Now, you can control your movement while jumping, which gives you some much needed error correction capability. It makes reaching tricky locations simpler, and the game is far more enjoyable as a result. The aim of the game is still the same. You must open the doors, open the screens, find the objects, and defeat the baddie. Much of the game layout is the same as it was before, which you would expect in a remaster, but now everything looks and moves far better, and it's definitely more fun to play. Jordi Sereda and Santiago Antonin have made a fantastic remake here. I cannot recommend this remake enough. It's brilliant. Go and play it. Go! And that is all we've got time for this time, so thank you very much for getting through to the end of this episode. I think we've seen some great new games there, brilliant old stuff, and we've looked at a huge amount of new releases. So as you can see, February of 1985 was an amazing time to be a CPC owner, and it only got better from here on in. So I hope you'll join me next time when we take a look at March 1985 on CPCine. Happy computing! If you liked today's video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you.